Hey, what's up? So today is, or this week is week 60 of the 50 weeks that you need. If you read 14 pages a day, you get through the Bible and 50 weeks. So we're on week six. Week six is Leviticus 15 through Numbers 4. And I don't know, I actually enjoy reading it. I feel like when I was younger, reading the Bible wasn't always the greatest thing. I think that until you've reached enough faith to really understand everything in the Bible is real, then I think that it can actually damage your faith or your relationship with your creator, or maybe just it can make your actions less godly, unless until you're ready to actually hear the things, because I feel like movies and academia doesn't coincide with how the Bible teaches what reality is. And so one way you notice is that when you take academia, you take history in academia, it doesn't take into the Bible in consideration of what actually happened in history. So if you go to like a history professor, very very little of the Bible will be taken as what happened. Academia is not going to take into account what the Bible says happened in history, and so academia's history and the Bible's histories don't coincide very well. So when you grow up, especially in the United States, or you watch in movies as well, I think movies and stuff, reality doesn't reflect what the Bible says, but academia history, I think, is a better example. It doesn't reflect. It doesn't coincide with what the reality of the Bible is, and so when you're younger, or you hear all this history and stuff like that, then it makes it so like the events in the Bible don't seem real, because like once again they just aren't like the same type of events that are played out in what we consider as history. And so I don't think history is very accurate. There's several reasons why. Obviously, there's the old saying, history is written by the victors. And if we don't even know, or if we can't even agree on what's happening today with all the technology that we have, if you watch a different news source, or you watch YouTube, or you have all these different theories about what's happening in a lot of the events of today, then it seems like we really wouldn't have a good idea what happened 1,000 years ago or 2,000 years ago. And so it just seems kind of asinine, if we can't even all agree on what's happening now, then how can we all agree on what happened 2,000 years ago? And so it's just when you read the Bible when you're younger, and academia reflects a different reality than the Bible does, it kind of hurts your faith, because you're used to reality being what you see in movies and what you see in history. And if you, like, I guess if you stepped away from that and you stepped away to truth and just kind of your own reality, took your own reality as it happens to you day to day, and you didn't get influenced by other factors, then I think that the Bible would more coincide with your ability to grow faith. And so um, I used to not really enjoy it, but now I have a pretty good belief that the Bible, everything in the Bible is true, and it happened just like it says it does. And so I think it really helps my faith, and I find a lot of these things really interesting. This is like my third time going through it, and so since this is my several time going through the Bible the last couple of years, a lot of this is like kind of making more sense to me. At first, it was difficult um, to understand kind of what's happening, and it didn't really make a lot of sense, because the Bible, and I do the King James version. I think that's the true Bible, the Textus Receptus. But that's a different story. I kind of did a video on that, but um, it's difficult to understand what's happening. So, but at any rate, so for my 5 days, on Monday I did Israelites are not to do what the people of where God brings them. Not to do Israelites are not to do what the people do where God brings them. And so this was important for God, that the Israelites, when they go to the land that was promised to them, flowing with milk and honey, that they don't do the abominations of what the people that were there were doing. He talks about the Bible talks about how the land spewed them out because of the abominations that they did, and they passed their seed to Moloch, which I'm pretty sure, from what I understand, that means they sacrifice their children, and they talk about not to lay with beasts, and they talked about man laying with man and woman laying with woman, or mankind laying with mankind the way he lays with womankind, and taking or having your sister or your mother, and these are all things that were not acceptable. And in the further back, having your own kin, Abraham and Sarah. Sarah was like Abraham's sister or half sister or whatever. I'm not exactly sure, but this was acceptable. But that was because the situation, I think, called for that. But once the situation didn't call for that, I think it was a really big problem. And so the Israelites, the land spewed them out. Not the Israelites, but the people that were before the Israelites got there. And so God didn't want them to do after the doings of either the Egyptians or the Israelites. And so he wanted them to do after what he told them to do, and be a completely different people. And that's really difficult, when you go somewhere or you live somewhere, if God moves you somewhere, he doesn't want you to do what you were doing before, and he doesn't want you to do where you're going either. He doesn't want you to do after both these doings. He wants you to do what he wants you to do. And I think that's applicable to some people's lives and some people's walk with their Creator. I don't think it's obviously not the same, but I don't think it's the same at any rate. But it's just something that can be thought about, and I really enjoy that idea at least. And then Tuesday was "Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself." And Jesus says this, and you hear that in the New Testament a lot, but it's also in the Old Testament. And it's very interesting that this was way back when, and still it has been the New Covenant and the Old Covenant. It was a very important part of both of these. And I'm not sure if it was such a crucial cornerstone of the Old Testament, but in the New Testament, it's definitely a crucial cornerstone of how we're to behave. And I think Jesus gives a good reflection on this. And I think that even in the Old Testament, this is very important, or it seems like, at least, I don't know if it's very important, actually, to be honest, because it doesn't seem like it's noted as much as the New Testament, but it's definitely a thought or an idea that was implemented back then, back in the Old Testament, Moses. And Wednesday is the Feast of the Lord. And I think this is really important. I mean, I do think that these are like parties that were thrown, and I think it helps the camaraderie, and I think that it helps the people, and I think that it helps the poor people, and I think it grows like a sense of community. And so these feasts that were done were pretty cool, and I think that we've lost kind of this idea of these parties, and I think that modern day Christianity tries to separate itself from parties or festivals, and that's because a lot of festivals and parties that are undergone in secular society is sinful, but it doesn't mean that parties and these feasts and these events can't be done in a Christian way. But a lot of Christians are like, oh no, you can't drink alcohol, you can't go and get drunk. But that's what the Old Testament, that's what Jesus drank wine. And so I think that I think that modern Christianity is set up in a way that's almost impossible to succeed. If it's not, I think it might be purposely built in a way, or hasn't built in a way, or changed in a way that it's impossible for it to succeed in a level that makes God happy. And so that's why I'm trying to make the Church of God. I'm trying to change some of these things and bring it back to where I think God, where it can at least have the ability to perform in a way that God would be pleased with. Right now, I don't think that it is in any of the churches that I've been to or I've seen. Okay, and then Thursday is the Jubilee. And so the Jubilee, from my understanding, is like every 49 years or 50 years or so, all the land was like returned back to the people of the original tribes. So this is interesting that, even though you sold the land, after 50 years, the land was brought back to the people of whatever tribe that they were from, the 12 tribes. And I'm not quite exactly sure how this works. And so I've read it and I've kind of researched a little bit, but I'm not too knowledgeable on the Jubilee, but I think that's pretty much what it sounds like. I mean, Jubilee for me is, the X-Men character. So that's kind of, that's pretty much is like the more kind of prominent view in my mind about what the word Jubilee is. I mean, I don't know, I really liked X-Men. It was a very enjoyable show for me when I was younger. I don't know if I can relate to it or if it was just very appealing, but so the Jubilee is the idea of a Jubilee being after 49 years in the Old Testament is kind of a new concept for me, and most of my connections that I have are different, and so like a lot of times I'm trying to like unlearn these connections and form proper connections of truths, and so that's difficult. Sometimes it's really difficult to unlearn what you've already learned in order to learn something new. And then Friday is tithes, and there's lots of different tithes that were done in the Old Testament, and I think it's a lot different now because in the Old Testament you had tithes were pretty much the taxes, and so we're already paying taxes to the government, and so people are like, well, why aren't you paying 10% to the church? But I'm paying 20% or so to the government already, so I'm already being tithed 20% of all my earnings, and then I'm also being tithed 10% or whatever the sales tax is, and so pretty much about 20% of what I earn, and then on what I earn, that 80%, 10% of that I'm being taxed as well. And so it's not, I'm already tithing because I'm getting taxed. And I think that in the Jewish time, that was the tax, was the tithing. But I guess they had to also pay. I mean, I feel like that was the tax, was the tithes. And this is like one of the first forms of taxation, I think, for the Jewish people, for God's people at least. But I would imagine there's always been taxation in some form or another. But these tithes were really important, and because these were on top of, from my understanding at least, on top of the sacrifices. So the sacrifices were how much for like sin offerings and grain offerings, stuff like that. And then you have different types of tithes. But this was all obvious. I mean, this was all, I feel like, at least to strengthen the community. And I think it's important for the community to be strengthened and for the church to have money, and God's people to have money, and for the money to be taken from some and given to the other, or just kind of spread out. And it just seems to almost like stagnant water kills fish. Nothing can survive in stagnant water. And so if the money's not being circulated through the culture or the country or the organization or whatever it is, then it just becomes, the money becomes stagnant, and so everything just dies. So you have to have like this circulation. And I think that God set up the people for them to be able to prosper. All the different rules and expectations that God gave down or gave through Moses were for the people to prosper. And like I really liked like how the priests were pretty much doctors. They diagnosed different illnesses and they told them how to treat them. And a lot of it was just if you're dirty, if you have an infection or a scab or leprosy or the plague, you clean it, or you clean it out of it, and then everyone else stays away from it, stays away from the person that has it. And if it spreads to something else, then you just clean or get rid of the thing that it spread to. And not eating the blood, and just eating the certain foods that are healthy, and how to cook them, and not to leave them for a certain amount of days. And so these are all just like ways for the Jewish people to prosper and to be healthy and wealthy and wise. And so these were very, very smart and very good directions that God gave, I feel, to the people. And I think this was obviously a big part of the Jewish success, was these instructions that God gave them. And so it's very cool. So yeah, that's pretty much Leviticus 15 through Numbers 4. I like I said, I enjoy reading this. I used to hate, these older or these harder ones, Leviticus and Numbers. But I think it starts getting to the genealogy. When it starts getting to the genealogy and names, I think this next couple weeks coming up, that's a lot more difficult for me. I just don't enjoy that. I don't think it's hard for me to pronounce all the names, and I don't really get too much from it, I feel. But I feel like, I didn't feel like I got a lot from these other stuff too, but eventually it becomes an important part. And things that weren't exciting for me in the Bible when I first started become more exciting as I keep reading through it. And so it's a very cool experience for me. So I really enjoy it. But yeah, at any rate, I hope everyone's doing good. I hope everyone's kind of reading along. Like I said, if you just read 14 pages a day, around 14 pages, depending on your Bible, I guess. My Bible is 14 pages, but if you read about 14 pages or so a day or a week, and you can read the Bible in about 50 weeks. And so like I've also changed it into the different instead of the pages, the chapters. And so I don't know how many chapters it is about, which could have been an interesting way to do it. Instead of how many pages you read each day, is how many chapters you read each week, or not each day, but each week. And so that might be a different way of doing it, is instead of separating it in pages, is how many chapters. And I'm curious if I do about how many chapters, and then it'd be like a similar thing. I wonder how many chapters I go to. So that'd be a different way of looking at it. But anyway, hope everyone's doing good, and God bless, and happy truth seeking.